We have another very special guest alert because on today's show, we're bringing on Alex Insdorf to talk about the latest Chargers rumor, including Jaire Alexander now being available and also some Davante Adams propaganda.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, man? Welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you for the everydayers out there for making us your first listen day, and to make sure that you never miss big-time guests like on today's show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. We have a fun one for you today with Alex Insdorf, who's a contributor for Bolt Beat and also part of the Guilty as Charged podcast. But so much good stuff to get into, including Jaire Alexander and the Chargers' kind of underrated need for cornerback, and also why Davante Adams is his top choice for a weapon for Justin Herbert, and also some guys from the Eagles and Rutgers, of course, some propaganda to getting those guys onto the team. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Here he is, Alex Insdorf. All right, guys, well, this is another very special guest in the off-season of guests, and we're talking to someone who might be the king of guests with all of the guests that he's had on Bolt Breakdowns recently. We have Alex Insdorf on the show today, who not only hosts the Bolt Breakdowns as part of the, I guess, Guilty as Charged network, but also is a contributor for Bolt Beat and puts out really my favorite Bolt Beat content. I think he's done a great job, one of the best, some of the best written Chargers content out there, in my opinion. So, Alex, thank you so much. I know it's late your time. You're not in America right now, so it means even more that you came on the show today.
Appreciate the kind words. David asked about time zone when we were scheduling, and I was just like, yeah, we're just going to go with whatever they say in California. It's going to be hard to schedule around my time. So pleasure to be on.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, David knows all about that because I've kept David up to ungodly hours going off of California time, which he is 2 hours ahead of. So, a lot of 2 a.m. shows wrapping up for David Drogemeyer. Dan always kind of gets it the best, honestly. I mean, it's a solid 7 p.m. now as we're doing this. Just perfect timing. The baby's asleep, all of that. But let's start with the news. There was some big news that came out today, which is that the Packers are reportedly shopping Jaire Alexander, which will, and they'll move him if the price is right, according to Ian Rappaport. They are open to moving him. He's 28, 2-time Pro Bowler, also a 2-time second-team All-Pro. But he is probably now the most talented cornerback available to you, right? That is, if you want to address it and you're looking to upgrade at that position, which feels like much less of a need now, at least that you have two guys you feel pretty good about in Cam Hart and Tarheeb still. Do you think the Chargers should be interested in his services?
I think they should be interested, not in a trade, but if he is released, I think you take a chance on it, right? I don't know. That's going to be the question going into it, is what is his value, right? Because obviously he, over the next 2 years, I think has cap hits of 25 and 27 million. I don't expect that if he were to be released that he would get a contract in that range, especially after kind of the last 2 years, the injuries, as well as, some of the stuff with coaches. I do think that this is probably, looking to kind of rebuild his value. And does he sort of take, like a kind of 1 year, maybe 2 year deal and sort of like boost his value back up for, free agency, right? How many more bites does he have kind of at the apple as a corner too, right? He's 28.
Yeah.
The lifetimes of cornerbacks in the league, unless you're Stephon Gilmore, are not that long. That's kind of like the exception of the rule. So
and he's missed half the games the last 4 seasons too, right? I mean, this is not a 28-year-old who's had a pristine record in the health department. At least he's played in exactly half of the games, 34 games he's missed over the last 4 seasons. Has to play a part of it, especially when you're thinking about trading for him and taking on those cap hits like you're talking about.
Right. Especially, you're considering trading for him, taking on and, expecting him to kind of be in that role too, right? I think it just kind of has to be the right fit at the right time. Obviously, a couple of years ago, the Chargers invested in JC Jackson to kind of like do the same thing. Obviously, a much longer term contract, but I think just off the field wise, as well as, from an injury health standpoint, do think it has to be the right situation for the team. Don't mind a flyer if he is just kind of put out there. But I do think quarterback is kind of a maybe bigger need than people have pointed it out to be, right? I think certainly you have Cam Hart, you have Tarheeb Still, who one of them is going to be your outside, and the Tarheeb is probably going to be starting the slot. Cam Hart had trouble staying on the field last year with concussions as well as other issues. So how much stock do you put into them? I do really believe that they'll have great second years, but then you're still one corner short. So then I think
you're not a Jaire Taylor truther. Is that what you're telling us right now? You breaking that news on the podcast right now? You have an all pro slot cornerback too, and Derwin James. Don't forget.
Right, you do have Derwin James. I'm not a Jaire Taylor truther. However, Jaire Taylor truther, occasionally good on special teams. He had a couple moments at the end of the year. But
I'm a Dean Leonard truther. I don't know why.
Yeah. So I think, Dean Leonard will be one of those guys that I think is probably in contention kind of for that outside role. But I still think if you want to solidify it, they have Christian Fulton and Asante Samuel Jr., who are free agents. Do you want to bring one of those guys back to kind of stem things, or do you want to go in another direction? And Jaire Alexander certainly could be one of those.
I mean, Jaire obviously very talented, and when he's on the field, a great player. But that's the thing; it's when he's on the field, and so that's why I feel like any prospective team, whether it's the Chargers or anybody else, is going to have to probably give him more of an opportunity as a flyer. Like it's like, hey, I need a year for you to prove that you can stay on the field, stay productive and effective before we start talking about a longer term agreement. But we know going into 2025 that the Chargers need to address giving Justin Herbert more weapons. And one at the top of our list, in free agency at least, is Davante Adams when he is released from the Jets. We know you are on the Adams bandwagon as well. And why do you like the fit so much for the Chargers?
I think you just look at what Davante Adams can really bring to this offense. The Chargers just had trouble, I think, methodically going down the field last year, right? And that's something that I think you need to do as far as being a playoff team, right? You can hit the big plays to Ladd McConkey. You can hit the big plays to somebody else, but they're not always going to be available in that sense. And so that, I think, is kind of how do you get Justin Herbert to be one of those quarterbacks that can just go down the field and score. And Davante is just a guy that you can target over and over and over again in that very routine way, similar to Keenan Allen. I think back in the day where, you kind of had that third and Keenan culture, if you will. So Davante is somebody that also really excels off of play action looks in particular. Play action was really the Chargers' bread and butter last year, is their most efficient thing on offense. So I think when you put everything together, the downside of this is that Davante might want to follow his buddy Aaron Rodgers wherever he is going. So that is a concern, depending on what happens with Matthew Stafford at the other LA team. We'll see what comes of that. But I think if you were just looking at it as a pure free agent fit, if it is true per Jeremy Fowler's reporting that he does want to come back to California, I really think there's not a spot better than the Chargers where he can contribute and make a market difference. He had a really impressive year last year. You just take his December games on a 17-game pace, he would have had 1,600 yards. That's still how good he has been playing at 32, 33 years old. Had the highest yards after catch of his career after, weird, at 32, 33 years old again. So to me, this is a player who still has a lot left in the tank, and you're worried about taking on a receiver like that. But I think out of all the Chargers options, of anybody that is, to be released or to be a free agent trade candidate, I think he is kind of the one that can really be an addition on the outside to that Justin Herbert buddy ball that he already has with Ladd. But now you kind of bring some of that West Coast timing-based offense, and really no one, I think, available is better at that than Davante.
And you take some attention away from Ladd McConkey, too, which I think is really important.
And that's the funny thing is, like, Ladd McConkey in that game, right, goes insane, like goes nuclear. He was obviously the one guy to stop. Maybe it was a kind of LeBron thing where it's like, hey, let's just stop everybody else and we'll just let Ladd McConkey get his type of a situation. But I think you look at kind of what Justin Herbert had, even with a Mike Williams, where, they really went to that back shoulder ball, just having that one-on-one outside and knowing, hey, if I get this, I'm throwing him the football. They tried it last year with Quentin Johnston. If a lot of those looks, down the sideline, back shoulder type of balls, one-on-one type of plays are going to Davante Adams instead of Quentin Johnston, who's not really meant for that type of role, I think you could see a huge improvement. I think a lot of people get caught up in the speed and they get caught up in the age and kind of forget when looking at Davante Adams' numbers. He missed 4 games last year and he still almost put up a 1,000-yard season on an absolute dumpster fire of a team. He's the guy for me at the top of my list, at least as far as weapons. Also, add in the fact that he wouldn't count against the comp pick formula, which you have to think is something that Joe Ortiz cares a lot about and has shown that he's cared a lot about. That's just kind of a cherry on top for me. But instantly getting such an upgrade in the weapons department if you could land a Davante Adams. Only one team's going to get him, right? And if the Chargers were to strike out on Davante Adams and other receivers in free agency, do any of the trades interest you? There's been so many things floated, whether it's DK Metcalf or Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel. Do any of those make sense to you? Or who would you like the most, I guess, out of that group if the Chargers were to kind of pivot and look to trade for a potential weapon for Justin Herbert?
I think out of that group, Metcalf is the one that makes the most schematic sense to me, right? Just a big body
Agreed.
You can put on the outside. Some contested catch issues with him over the last 2 years, but I really think that, it's kind of a weird fit with him now in the Seattle offense now that they have Njigba there. Hasn't been getting quite targeted as much as he used to earlier in his career. But I think you get him, and he is that automatic guy that you can go to in a different way than Davante.
Yeah.
But like you talked about with what Mike Williams used to be, you can throw back shoulder balls to him. You can get him down the sideline. And he's still, pretty good at creating separation, getting open. You probably do have to give him a heftier extension than maybe some of the other guys that you would trade or sign. But in my opinion, I think if you're not getting Davante, then DK, especially in the trade market, maybe you have to give up a pick. But in this wide receiver class of the draft, I do think that is kind of a necessary thing to do to get a more proven commodity. And that is what DK's been. I think he adds a lot and takes a lot of the stress off of the rest of the offense, like we just talked about with Davante. I think if you have Quentin Johnston playing that more wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type role, and you have Ladd, who is, bona fide in the slot, you trust him, and you have a bona fide threat X receiver on the outside, it really opens up a lot of opportunities for this offense.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen that in a long time. You have guys on the inside and the outside that can torch you, and DK is just a incredible mixture of that size and speed.
I'd say Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, right? But unfortunately, we just didn't get to see that inside-outside combination enough. But and it's not about wide receiver 1, right? I think we get all too caught up in the wide receiver 1 thing. It's just someone that fits well with Ladd. Ladd is your wide receiver, not 1. The DK, you could argue, really hasn't even had, hasn't had a season recently like the one that Ladd McConkey just had. But one of the reasons we wanted to bring Alex on was to let him serve up some of his propaganda. We've already started with Davante Adams. We know you're bringing on a bunch of guests, but now, David, it's time to let him talk about the teams we know he desperately wants to talk about deep down.
Absolutely. Well, we know obviously that you cover the Chargers, and I believe that you're probably more of a Charger fan, but you also root for the Super Bowl champion Eagles as well.
Yeah.
First, congrats
that must have been nice
to you, because it must have been awesome watching them just spank the Chiefs in front of the entire world.
Double win.
Also, with the Eagles, there's a lot of impending unrestricted free agents. And so, of those unrestricted free agents, which one would you like the Chargers to add to their team?
I think Milton Williams is the one that makes the most sense on paper. It just gives you a lot more pass rush use if you're willing to pay up for it. And that is kind of the question I have with the Chargers this offseason. We don't know what they're going to do with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. We don't know exactly how, Puna Ford bringing back Tier Tart and stuff like that's going to go. So I think if you just pay up for kind of a bona fide guy on the interior, it solves a lot of your problems. Now, do you want to pay for that player in a year where the defensive tackle class in the draft is so stacked and Daniel Jeremiah says there's 24 guys who can start?
Starters, yeah.
Wild.
So that's a question mark for, what the DT market is going to be for a lot of these guys. But I do think he would solve a lot of the pass rush issues that you just saw where the Chargers were able to get pressure, but they were not able to quite finish plays. And you saw that in the Texans game on that 3rd and 14 that CJ Stroud ends up completing, and it changes the momentum. Not to bring it up again, but one of those plays you need to make if you are a playoff team, right? And so the Chargers, I think, had were 22nd in the regular season in pass rusher win rate. So I just think you solidify your defensive tackles, and things will be a lot smoother. The other name that I would mention, from the Eagles, if they do want to poach it, and this is dependent on what they decide to do with Mack and Bosa, is Josh Sweat. If you are only bringing one of Mack or Bosa back, which Adam Schefter, if you listen to his Pat McAfee appearance today, did kind of insinuate that his prediction is that only one of those guys is back.
Which makes sense, right? That makes the most sense anyways, with what the cap hits are going to be.
Right. It makes the most sense. So, if you have that extra money from cutting Joey Bosa, or you have that money from letting Khalil Mack walk, and you want to add somebody like a Josh Sweat in free agency, who's a proven pressure creator, sack artist over the last few years. I think he has something like 15, 16 sacks plus 122 pressures the last 2 years.
Wow.
I just think he would markedly help out that defensive line. Helps the defensive line get a little bit younger. I think he's kind of a similar age to Bosa, actually, but obviously a lot less wear and tear on that body injury wise, right. And a whole 5 years younger than Khalil Mack. So I think that's a move that the Chargers could look at as well if you're kind of looking to poach some talent from the Super Bowl champions.
Yeah, not all 29-year-olds are alike, right? Especially in NFL years and in NFL mileage. So I think both of those guys would go towards, the plan of, hey, look what the Eagles front just did to your biggest rival and the team that's standing in between you and potential playoff runs in the Chiefs. They dominated it. And I think that even if you were to go for a Milton Williams, it wouldn't stop you from doubling down on that in the draft and trying to create, a real strength at a position that has really, I think, struggled in a lot of years up until this year because of the play they got from Poona Ford and Tier Tart. It'll be really interesting to see if the defensive tackle free agency class gets impacted by how well received this defensive tackle draft class is, right? Will that bring some of those numbers down a little bit? That we don't know at this point. But speaking of propaganda, we also know that you're the leader in Rutgers propaganda on
the only person who supports the Chargers that knows what a Rutgers is. But yeah, I did go there for college, for those who don't know. So yeah, very, very much a Rutgers fan.
But also, you have guys like Max Melton last year that comes out. You have guys like Isaiah Pacheco, obviously, that comes out and have made big impacts. I know you were fans of those guys. So
yeah,
we wanted to give you the platform to spread it. Who else is giving you the spot to
I appreciate it. I don't even think Steven and Tyler give me this much time to talk about Rutgers guys.
They absolutely do not. This is your platform. Who do you think who are the guys you're propping up from this draft class from Rutgers, an up and coming big whatever superpower?
Yeah, I do think the name that I most like for the Chargers is Kyle Monangai, the running back out of Rutgers, who will test at the combine this week. We'll see how he does, but basically the last 2 years in college, he has 1,200 yards each season. Very consistent contributor, very downhill runner that I think would be enjoyed by Greg Roman. Also, for the questions that people have about Vidal and pass protection, for the pass protection questions of some of the other players, I do think he is someone that is a kick-ass pass protector as well. And I think, you add him into this group. We'll see what they do with Gus Edwards. We'll see what they do with Dobbins. But I really think this is a draft in addition to him where you look at this running back class, and if they came away with 2 running backs in some combination, either through the draft or draft plus an undrafted guy, I really think this is kind of the class to do that. I feel like I've watched 15 of them so far. Maybe more than that at this point, but this is the class to kind of go get a running back, irrespective of what you decide to do with Dobbins and what you decide to do with Edwards. And Monangai, I think, is the guy that I look at as kind of being the next Pacheco, if you will, of Rutgers backs who just kind of run with that attitude. But I also think he's probably a more skilled prospect where they haven't unlocked some of those things in his game, because Rutgers not known for being a passing offense. So I think that, there's more at the next level. He actually, per PFF's calculation, finished with the most missed tackles per reception amongst running backs over even Ashton Genty and some others. Just that Rutgers doesn't throw the ball that much, so they didn't get to use it. But I think there really is some untapped potential at the next level too for Monangai.
We have more great stuff with Alex Insdorf coming up right after this, including more on this running back draft class and also some underrated needs that the Chargers still have, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet just on fourth quarter comebacks, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay, which I love to do. I also love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Even if you had a bad bet at the beginning of the game, the best part about live in-game betting is you can change your fortunes in real time based on how the game is going and getting a feel for how that game is. And whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All you have to do, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, and I mean, the Chargers really struggled last year. They really had no sort of running back passing game at all, right? And you talked about this draft class. First of all, you're a medical student. How the hell have you watched, 15 running backs already? That makes no sense to me.
Saturday mornings are great.
He doesn't do 5 shows a week.
Okay, that's fine. True, either way, that's real sicko behavior. Do you think, I know you're a late day 3, find those running backs there guy, and every year you have, Kamani Vidal being one of them last year as a guy that you targeted late. Do you think this is a year we could see the Chargers step it up as far as the resources they actually spend at that position? Because, I mean, the last, we won't count Kamani in that group yet, but when you talk about the Spillers and the Larry Roundtrees and, all of those guys, even Josh Kelly of the world, do you think this is a year maybe they step it up and go day 2 pick at running back or decide to spend more on it?
For loyal viewers of the Guilty as Charged program, they will remember that I was a truther of Khalil Herbert over Larry Roundtree.
Yes, you were.
Who they decided to take Larry Roundtree over, as well as the next year Jerome Ford over Isaiah Spiller. But so there were several ways that the Chargers kind of went wrong there. But I do think this is a year where you could certainly step it up. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers are in round 1. I absolutely love Omarion Hampton out of UNC, even if Ashton Genty is long gone by the time the Chargers are up. I think that, Daniel Jeremiah's most recent mock either had him taking them at that selection, and then there's some scenarios where they can also trade down as well and maybe go back to 24, 25, pick up an extra pick, and then also, make out with Hampton. I think that is an absolute stud pick. I know there's some people, probably in the comments who will be pissed about running back round 1. And, we'll see whether the Chargers in free agency position themselves as a team that is able to do that.
Right.
But I think you look at what Hampton was able to do, and he is exactly that kind of bell cow back you can rely on that also has, I think, that physicality and explosiveness. Very similar player, I think, to kind of what Joe Mixon was on the Texans this year. I think that you add Hampton into this offense and maybe even bring JK back, and your running back field is set for next year, in addition to what you want to do on RB3, special teams type stuff. But those top 2 guys, I think, would be set. Another name that interests me at the top of the draft, if we're talking about those first 2-3 rounds, and I really think about this with Dobbins too. If you bring Dobbins back and, he's obviously the guy that is going to, pick up the tough yards, kind of run in between the tackles, still very, I would say, elusive at this stage of his career in terms of what he's able to do in between the tackles. Impressive last year. If you want to add that speed element, him and TreVeyon Henderson would be so awesome, man. And I know that's 2 OSU backs in a Jim Harbaugh backfield, but I think you add him there and you just have some insane speed and a nice contrast to kind of go off of in building that room. Dobbins gets his 10 to 15 carries a game, and you give Henderson his 5 to 10. And he is kind of like he was with Judkins this year at Ohio State, kind of that, just a weapon that you can keep in your back pocket, and suddenly there's a big 60-yard gain down the field, right? So I think that is an element this Chargers offense has been missing. They obviously didn't necessarily plan around that last year, but having a running back who can create those explosive plays like a Henderson or a Hampton, I think is important. And I think they could certainly break and do that this year. The alternative to that is obviously this is a deep running back class. So if you want to wait till round 4, round 5, I get it. But this is certainly the year, if there was a year, to get one of those guys at the top.
I just want to see them make good on what they've been saying about getting Justin Herbert a running game and seeing what that actually looks like, because, you know, they said it last year, but it doesn't really happen. But, you know, probably get you out of here on this. Everyone knows that the biggest need for the Chargers going into the offseason is the wide receiver and the offensive line. But is there any position that you're more worried about that maybe people aren't talking about? I know you mentioned corner earlier, but anything else outside of corner?
I really look at the edge room. And I know we kind of talked a little bit about Bosa and Mac earlier, and what they decide to do there. But I think you just look at some of these pass rushes in the Super Bowl, obviously what the Eagles were able to do, but league wide, I just don't know if you can go into next year, even if Bosa takes a pay cut, even if you bring Mac back and run it back for the 4th time with Khalil Mack at 34, dealing with a groin injury like he did for about 2-3 weeks last year. Joey Bosa, unfortunately, dealing with the hip injury he dealt with last year, and he turns 30 this summer. I think that they need kind of a change there, maybe more so than has been led on. And I think financially they may hit that point anyway, depending on what Mac decides to do, depending on if Bosa is willing to take a pay cut again.
Yeah.
But to me, I think it is time for some new blood in there, whether that is an early round pick, whether that is, you know, being aggressive on the edge market and getting a player like Josh Sweat, who we mentioned earlier. I do think this is, while edge is not the top need, I think it certainly becomes that if one of or both of Mac or Bosa are gone, and you potentially need to rebuild this edge room in some capacity. So I sell the notion that you can run this back a 4th time with both of these players as old as they've been.
Yeah.
And as injured as they've unfortunately been, and expect, you know, the same, if they stay healthy, production. I don't think going into year 4 of this experiment that to me is sustainable. So I'd like to see them be a little aggressive and get those edges for Jesse Minter's defense, because I think that you look at linebacker, I have a lot of faith in Deion Henley, a lot of faith in Junior Colson to take a step forward.
Ooh.
Secondary is kind of set. You know, obviously they'll add, a corner here. But like you look at the 2nd and 3rd levels of their defense and they're set. And it's really the defensive line and the pass rush that they need to figure out, I think, to take that next step on defense. So wide receiver is important. Offensive guard is important. Zion Johnson playing center maybe is important. See what happens. But to me, I think I look at the edge rusher room as maybe the most concerning defensive storyline this season.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest one to figure out, because I think, to what you're saying, and a point even further than that, there's a chance that neither of those dudes are back, right? There's a chance that neither Joey Bosa nor Khalil Mack is back. And just because you potentially lose Khalil Mack doesn't necessarily mean the right option is to keep Joey Bosa at a $36 million cap hit. And I don't know what the pay cut would have to be to make that a reasonable contract for Joey Bosa. Like, it's at 36. How much is he going to take? Is he a $30 million pass rusher? Is he a $25 million pass rusher at this point? Those numbers don't necessarily add up. So I do think that, first of all, neither of those guys is your long-term answer, right? I think there's a good case for Tuitu Pelotu as an heir apparent to one of those guys.
Right.
But where's the other long-term answer there? And right now, I don't think that's on the roster. So I totally agree that is an underrated need, and one that could kind of get to alarm bells, panic level very quickly, especially with Joe Ortiz saying, hey, Khalil Mack's never had a free agency period in his life. He's always been under contract. This is the first time he can test it. I said on yesterday's show, it gives me Joe Shane Hard Knock vibes, where it's like, hey, Khalil, make sure you give us a call, right? We'll let you test the waters, but make sure you give us a call before you go sign somewhere else. That one scares me a little bit. So I do think, hopefully Khalil Mack's back. I don't see both of those guys running back, but I do think that is an underrated need going into this offseason. But Alex, before we go, anything you want to plug here as far as, any guests you might have coming up, or maybe a guest you just had that you really liked that you would like to point people to?
I talked with Matt Miller recently. Talked with Theo Ash
NFL draft
recently.
scout. Yeah.
I want to. I'll tease it, but I'm not gonna maybe say who it is. But maybe we'll do a little free agency type preview next week with a good guest. So stay tuned on the Guilty as Charged podcast channel if you want to check that out. Do my work on Bolt Beat, like I said. You can find me on Twitter, tweeting about. You can find Joe Ortiz on Twitter too. Now you can find.
Is there any progress in finding Joe Ortiz's burner account? That was one.
No,
I
did look. I just looked up Joe Ortiz in the search bar, and then you see just Joe H Ortiz, just like two random accounts. So maybe he's one of those.
8645039.
Yeah, we haven't located his burner. Maybe he doesn't have a burner. Maybe it's just his son or somebody else telling him what people are talking about on Twitter. But when he said that yesterday, I felt a little bit.
I love that.
I felt a little bit seen. So it was nice to get that respect from the GM and that he's seeing all of our great wide receiver ideas.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, the thing that they're not interested in anyone that's not in the draft or free agency is pretty funny. But we actually, we talked about it on yesterday's show. Alex Insdorf points out a great point. Joe Ortiz definitely has a burner account and is listening to all the crazy stuff and maybe some good ideas that are floating around out there. But hey, thank you so much for coming on again, man. We can't wait to do it soon again.
Yeah, no problem, man. Anytime.
Another special thank you to Alex Insdorf. He was awesome. I definitely want to get him back on the show, but we will be back with you guys on Monday because it is your team every day. Maybe some mock draft Monday, maybe a little mailbag Monday since we didn't get to that this week. But to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding us every day on all of our social media. You can find us on Twitter at Locked On LAC, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Me and David also post a show every day to our own Twitter accounts. For me at Dan Talk Sports and David at Dro Talk SD. But make sure you guys are back for Monday's show. Until then, guys, take it easy and go Bulls.